The Committee on Oversight is called to order. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Chairman Singh.
Present.
Senator McMorrow. Here. Senator Geis. Present. Senator Polanki. Here. Senator McBroom. Senator Lindsay. Mr. Chair, there are 4 members present. There is a quorum.
I'll make a motion to excuse absent members without objection. The motion carries, and I understand that my colleagues, Senator McBroom and Senator Lindsay, most likely will be joining virtually as our rules allow for, and so we'll welcome them as they come on to the Zoom. I'll entertain a motion at this time to adopt the meeting minutes from May 14th. So moved by Senator McMorrow. Hearing no objections, the minutes are adopted. All right. Today, we're going to be discussing the economic impact and declining consumer confidence that we're seeing here in Michigan, but also throughout the country, based on economic decisions that are coming out of Washington, D.C. As we'll hear a little bit more, a study was recently done and data was released from the University of Michigan that shows that consumer sentiment recently plunged to the second lowest levels since the early 50s, declining to levels even lower than those that were experienced during the Great Recession. As we are aware, since President Trump has come into office, he has implemented numerous tariffs on specific countries, industries, and products. Oftentimes, those tariffs have changed in short order and been modified over a period of time, and that has created a lot of confusion, as well as it has begun to see skyrocketing prices on certain products as we have seen some of those tariffs go into place. Some of these tariffs have been paused, some have been reduced, a number of them are also being legally challenged, so I want to acknowledge that, but all of those make it difficult for our businesses here in the state of Michigan. I think we have seen over a period of time our auto industry taking a look at 3 or 4 different proposals of tariffs and having to react to that. Obviously, those companies are international in nature, have the size and scope of lawyers and people who can look at this information, but are mom and pop shops who oftentimes buy product or have their product designed in other countries and then shipped over here to be sold. They don't have those same resources, and so they are often left into a lurch as we see these policies come forward on the federal level. To explore and understand this issue further, we'll hear from a few experts who are versed in economic policy and see how these recent consumer confidence numbers tie to different sectors in local businesses, and then also talk about the potential threats that tariffs could potentially have on our Michigan businesses, but businesses in general. In general, I think tariffs are a tool that should be used and used in a limited way, but oftentimes when you do blanket tariffs, as we've seen here, that also creates a set of issues for businesses, and we'll begin to address some of those pieces. We do have a couple business owners who will be joining us as well. And then one last thing before we get into the conversation that we have in front of us today, I want to let members know that I've presented and will be putting into the record the executive summary of a study done by Michigan State University, specifically the Canadian Studies Center. They are taking a look at specifically U.S. tariffs on Canadian imports, specifically in the manufacturing as well as Michigan vehicle space. If you have the chance to look at this and the underlying data that is there, you'll see that through April, it has shown a 19-fold jump in the calculated duties for imports from Canada. And those will obviously increase as the tariffs on steel and aluminum go to 50%. Those were put into effect this month. So that has not even been calculated in the numbers that you'll see here. Overall, the data shows that exports to Canada originating in Michigan has plunged in April of 2025 to levels not seen since COVID-19 lockdown. So as we take a look at all these issues, I know we'll be looking at them here, but I know other committees in the legislature are also tackling those issues so we can learn about what that impact is, what it means to our budget, what it means to long-term forecast for employment here in the state. Our first speaker today is Dr. Hsu from the University of Michigan, who will talk about that recent report that I had mentioned. And so, Dr. Hsu, please come forward and walk us through, I think, the PowerPoint that you have for us to take a look at.
Thank you so much for the invitation. Can you hear me? Thanks again for inviting me to come speak to this very esteemed committee, and I am looking forward to the opportunity to have this conversation about our study and its results. So I am the director of the University of Michigan Surveys of Consumers, which has been running for about 80 years. It was founded in 1946 at the university, and it is a nationally representative monthly survey of American consumers. And the reason why this survey is so important is because we capture the factors that influence consumer spending and saving behavior. And this is particularly important for economists or anyone who's watching the economy, because consumer spending generates about 70% of GDP. So the fate of the economy is inextricably intertwined with the fate of the consumer. And the data that we use include the data that we produce include the Index of Consumer Sentiment, which is widely used by policymakers, private sector economic forecasters, academics, and is widely followed in the public press as well. And the expectations data that we include, so consumers' views of what is going to happen in the future of the economy, has been recognized as a leading indicator. And what that means is that when consumer expectations fall, and when they fall sharply, a recession tends to follow, an economic downturn tends to follow. It's not always the case, but it is usually the case. And as such, our data have been included in the leading indicator index for the U.S. economy constructed by the Bureau of Economic Analysis, and also is included in the OECD's leading indicator index for the United States. And in terms of the public scrutiny of our data, we put out data twice a month. Our most recent data was the June preliminary data that was put out last Friday. Here on this slide is a selection of the media headlines that we saw. So you can see, and this is just a selection, a very small selection actually. So you can see that we are covered by a wide variety of news outlets, business news outlets, as well as general news outlets of all sort of political leanings. And to contextualize our recent trends, I've put up a chart of the Index of Consumer Sentiment going from about 2018 to the present. And what you can see at the bottom left corner of that yellow highlighted box, that was the all-time historic low that we have seen since 1946, and that was in June of 2022, and that occurred when inflation was reaching its peak. Since then, sentiment has improved quite a bit. So as of December of 2024, there was we've seen an increase of about 50% from that all-time low. And that includes a post-election increase in sentiment. So sentiment was increasing in the second half of last year and increased further after the presidential election. At the same time, things really turned a corner starting in January. So since that bump up in December, we had 4 consecutive months of very, very strong, steep declines. And moreover, it wasn't just our headline index of consumer sentiment. We saw deteriorating consumer views across multiple dimensions of the economy. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And the reason for this was very much triggered by evolution of trade policy, in particular the high tariffs that were announced early on, as well as a tremendous amount of uncertainty. Consumers were specifically citing unpredictability, instability, volatility and the uncertainty around trade policy is weighing down their views. And, I mentioned this is a leading indicator, and indeed, yesterday, the most recent retail sales numbers came out for May, and that ended up being, it shrank even more than experts had expected, and that's consistent with this downward trend that we had seen for 4 straight months. It declined 30% over that period. Now, the most recent reading, we did see a little bit of an improvement. This is, again, very much attributable to a bit of calming down of tariffs. Consumers had really braced for the worst when the extremely high reciprocal tariffs were announced. Economists don't think that the inflation that comes from tariffs is going to kick in for another couple of months, but I think from the consumer's perspective, they were expecting an immediate impact. That immediate impact didn't come to pass, so they're starting to worry a little bit less. However, we're still 20% below where we were in December. So consumers remain very, very wary about the future of the economy, in spite of the fact that they're not quite in the depths that they were in April and May. So the main factor that's weighing on consumers' minds right now is the same factor that's been in place for the last 4 years since the tail end of the pandemic, and that is purchasing power, cost of living. These pocketbook factors are top of mind for consumers. And furthermore, what's unique about this period relative to this 2022 period, when I mentioned the all-time low, back in 2022, labor markets were very strong and people were very confident about their incomes. So they were willing to keep spending in spite of the fact that they felt terribly about the economy. And so that, I would say, is an exception more than an exception to the rule that we've been seeing over the last 70 years. Now we're in a completely different situation where consumers are tremendously worried about labor markets. And on top of that, they are, it wouldn't be a big deal if people expect unemployment rates to rise, but they don't personally expect to be affected if they think other people might be laid off, but I won't be laid off. But increasingly, consumers are telling us that that my probability of getting laid off is greater than it used to be, and they're concerned about their incomes in the future. So it is unlikely that consumers will be willing to continue spending through these negative views of the economy as a result. So overall, consumers are expecting a resurgence of inflation and an economic slowdown, and they don't really have the strength and income expectations to support strong spending through that. So again, the key factor that is driving a lot of the downturn in consumer sentiment and the ongoing sluggishness in consumer views is the evolution of trade policy. So on this chart here, I'm plotting the share of consumers who are spontaneously providing unsolicited comments about tariffs. So our survey does not actually include specific questions about tariffs, but we have a lot of areas where consumers can offer their comments completely freely with no prompting. And as you can see, as of the last couple of months, almost 2/3 of consumers are providing unsolicited comments on tariffs. And that's a sharp increase over the last several months. November, October, and months prior, basically no one was mentioning tariffs. And the key thing about this is that people who mention tariffs have much worse views of the economy than people who don't. So, unlike other policies that people might mention on the survey, which is not 2/3, it might be like 2 or 3%. Some people might say, federal restructuring is a good thing, and some people may say it's a bad thing for the economy. Invariably for tariffs, across the political spectrum, people are expecting pain from tariffs. And that expectation of pain has just grown over time. And so in recent months, I'd say starting March, April, May, and June, we have a lot of consumers mentioning uncertainty. So when they mention tariffs, they're not just mentioning high tariffs and how that's going to increase inflation. They're also mentioning the fact that tariff policy is unpredictable, unstable, and uncertain. And consumers are fully aware that with this kind of uncertainty, it is very difficult for businesses to plan. And likewise, it's really hard for consumers to plan. So consumers are unlikely to be willing to make major decisions about their finances when there's so much uncertainty going on, and especially if they're worried that this uncertainty is going to lead to their incomes weakening. And again, there's a slight easing up of tariff concerns in June, based on our preliminary data in June. But these mentions are still sky high. Over 60% of people mentioning tariffs. This is really something that has captured the attention of consumers. One thing that I find really concerning about our data right now is the fact that the big downturn in sentiment is seen across the income distribution. Now, for people who are watching the macroeconomy and trying to understand is GDP headed for strong growth or weak growth or even a contraction, they're generally often watching high-income consumers, not because they're inherently interesting, but because they generate so much of aggregate consumer spending. So one thing that you'll note is that after that peak in June that trough in the middle of 2022, you saw a very strong recovery in sentiment for higher income folks, and that's consistent with the strong spending that we saw during that time. And now we're in a very completely different situation. We have high income consumers really, their sentiment is actually declining the most of the three high, middle, and lower income consumers. So these are the people who are responsible, who generate most of consumer spending, and if they don't have the confidence to continue spending despite all this uncertainty, that does not bode well for the aggregate economy. Expectations for business conditions and personal finances did improve a little bit in June, but as you can see, we're still well below where we were in December. So for both of these things, you can see a sharp deterioration in views and expectations for business conditions, as well as expectations for your own personal finances that began after the December reading, really plummeted over 4 to 5 months, improved a little bit, but still nowhere close to recover all the losses that were incurred since the beginning of the year. And furthermore, here I have plotted the share of consumers who expect unemployment rates to get worse next year. And so you can see in the yellow box the sharp increase in the share of consumers who are expecting unemployment to get worse. And we're still at the highest since the middle of the Great Recession. People are very worried about the state of labor markets. And this stands in sharp contrast to what we saw after the pandemic in that inflationary period, and that's in the green box. So in that green period, consumers really weren't worried at all about unemployment rates. And indeed, those were times when labor markets were very strong, when there were help-wanted signs everywhere. Consumers felt confident they could find a job if they wanted one, or if that they could negotiate a raise if they needed to. And that's just not the situation we're in right now. Consumers are quite worried about the future of the labor market. And again, as I mentioned, it might not really do anything to their personal behavior if they're concerned about labor markets generally, but they're actually don't think they're going to be personally affected. Like, my job is safe. My neighbor's job may be not safe, but my job is safe. And that's not what we're seeing in the data right now. In this chart, I have plotted the average probability that you're going to lose your job. You yourself might lose your job in the next 5 years. And what you can see in the yellow box is how far that has increased just this year. And again, this stands in sharp contrast to what we were seeing in that inflationary period after the pandemic, in which people just really weren't that worried about losing their jobs at all. So not only are they worried about the aggregate labor market, they are worried that they themselves will be impacted. And if that's the case, they are unlikely to continue spending in the robust way needed for continued robust economic growth. So to sum up, the key factors for consumers, sentiment has plunged over the course of 2025, largely attributable to the start of tariff policy uncertainty and the volatility around trade policy, as well as the high tariffs that have been announced at many junctures during this year. And this is not an artifact of political polarization. We see these worsening views of the economy across the political spectrum. Even among Republican consumers who may broadly agree with Trump's economic policies, they also believe that these policies will still harm the economy, at least in the short run and maybe the medium run as well. The May and June readings for consumer sentiment suggest that the bleeding may have stalled. So again, we had a 30% decrease in sentiment, 4 straight months. That's very unusual. So the fact that sentiment stalled in May and then improved modestly in June is certainly a good sign, but we're still at very, very low levels of sentiment and very negative views of the future. And all the signs in the survey are moving in the same direction. People feel worse about business conditions, unemployment rates, stock market performance, personal finances, their own incomes, inflation. Across the board, all the signs are moving in the same direction. And again, the critical vulnerability is the fact that people don't feel confident about their own incomes. And here, if you're interested in seeing more of this data for yourself, I've put the website up here. We publish all our results 10 a.m. Approximately every other Friday with a summary of results on the webpage, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Great, well, thank you. This was very interesting and very compelling. I appreciate the information. Let me start off with some questions from members of the committee. Senator McMorrow.
Thank you very much for being here and for your work. I know it's hard to pull and parse from the data to predict how consumers will react to change in sentiment. I think a lot of people were surprised that during the pandemic we saw consumer spending increase despite some of the changes. So what have you seen so far in some of the impacts for consumers as it relates to declining consumer sentiment?
So what we have seen over the last few months is people acting with their wallets, how they're telling us on the survey. So as an example, soon after the election, when strong tariff policies started being announced, we had a surge in consumers telling us now is a good time to buy durable goods, buy a car to get ahead of those tariffs. And that's exactly what we saw in Q4 in the fourth quarter of 2024, as well as the first quarter of 2025. So we had people telling us we're expecting inflation to get worse, and they acted to try to get ahead of it. And likewise, we had this 30% 4-month consecutive declines in sentiment and weak retail sales spending that we saw just yesterday. So that data reading was no surprise to my team and I, because that's exactly what we had been seeing in the data already.
Anybody else have any questions? Okay, well, thank you very much. Appreciate this. And just a reminder for those of us here as well as those who might be watching, this data comes out every 2 weeks, and that can be found here at the information that's here. So that'll be real helpful as we go through the summer and get into the fall and take a look at what has transpired during that period of time. So thank you very much. Our next speaker is Karen Roof, owner of My Secret Stash. Thank you for being here.
My name is Karen Roof, and I'm the owner of My Secret Stash, which just celebrated 11 years in downtown Traverse City. We're a very small little side street store. I also own a boutique plant store called I'm Planty AF, and I'm a partner at another newer store called Into Me, all very small independent businesses in the heart of our community. Additionally, I do serve as the vice president of our downtown Traverse City Merchant Association, which is a 501c6 nonprofit. So thank you for the opportunity to speak today about the real-world impacts of this declining consumer confidence in micro businesses in our community. I don't have fantastic research. This is anecdotal, but of course I speak to so many of our fellow business owners and managers and staff people downtown. So my business was founded with a commitment to supporting Michigan makers. Over time, the mission has grown to include various regional artists and a handful of national brands, but all with the same focus of supporting very small and independent producers. So what started as Michigan is certainly including Chicago and Ohio and all these kind of local places. Over the last 6 months, the economic climate has become increasingly unstable. This is not news to anyone. In a tourist town like Traverse City, even a small dip in consumer confidence has an outsized impact. Visitors are still coming. It's Traverse City. They're going to come. But they're spending more cautiously. They're booking shorter stays. They're dining out less and being more selective with their purchases. That slowdown affects our locals also. Our economy is deeply interconnected. So when our visitors spend less, the ripple effect hits our community members who rely on tourism and that driven income from that. Everyone feels the squeeze. So personally, I can't keep up with which tariffs are in effect at which times. it comes and goes. I know I'm not alone. For my secret stash and I'm Planty AF, I feel the impact has been limited thanks to a very strong, mostly American-made supply chain. About 85% of the products we carry are made by very small makers, a few national brands, and my favorites are all American-made, but things are made global. This is a global economy. I'm not actually having a lot of significant higher costs, but it's that threat of instability that's killing the flow. I'm affected by the population's perception, and I'm affected because our customers are simply not shopping because they're paranoid or frightened or aware that they're going to lose their job or that their costs are going to go so high that they can't kind of afford to enjoy themselves. Another store that I'm a partner in is called Intime, and that's very different. Many of the items at Intime are bespoke and sourced internationally, and there we're feeling the rising costs. Intime has been open just over a year, and instead of growing in that second year and following the trajectory that's been built, the sales are well below where they should be and where they were when we launched. So at a time when this store should be building momentum, we're moving in the opposite direction. We're facing rising costs and reduced discretionary spending. So for micro businesses like mine, typically with fewer than 5 employees, these shifts aren't just inconvenient, they're existential. This spring, I found myself slowing my inventory reorders because of cash flow issues. The first 6 months were just not pleasant. That meant missed sales when the season began. So what I was buying, I was trying to make sure I was hitting those top numbers. Our store is known for having quirky things that you don't find everywhere. And, you know, those interesting makers are still trying to make a living, so those prices are still holding. When I usually purchase kind of to an economy of scale, so I can get better pricing, I am now only purchasing the bare minimum. So if somebody has an opening order, that's kind of where I am because I can't, the fear of sitting on that and having to carry that is a little heavy. So that means that I'm reordering more often, which is increasing my shipping costs and holding costs. And I'm often out of something that somebody wants while I'm waiting for that next little small batch order to arrive. And I'm often, you know, somebody's looking for something that won't be here for 3 more days. I do know that my neighboring businesses can't always afford right now to hire their usual seasonal help. So summer in Traverse City is exponential. We all double and triple our staffing, and there are a lot of people who are not able to do that. So many owners are working 12-hour days just to stay open, and we're not cutting back to be lean. We're cutting back to survive. At my secret stash, our average transaction values and our foot traffic have dropped. And it makes a precarious situation. Shoppers are still there browsing. We're a store that people love to browse because it's quite entertaining and, you know, full of whimsy and joy, and people love the quirky things that we find. And they still browse, but what used to be spontaneous and joyful purchases, they're becoming more restrained. I love that they tell me they love my selection, though, so that's always great. That change may seem small, but it really does add up quickly behind the scenes. The truth is that businesses my size don't have safety nets or access to capital that large companies do. We feel the economic shifts instantly. When I'm usually staffing up right now to pick up an extra 8 to 10 people for the summer, I'm holding at 5, and that includes myself, hoping for maybe one more superstar. Like if I'm gonna bring somebody on, they're gonna be that great one. And I'm working nonstop, like 24/7. We've had to scale back marketing, limit staffing, and rethink how we operate on every single day. Beyond the financial pressure, there's certainly a personal toll, right? Supporting 3 businesses requires constant focus and flexibility, and lately it feels like all I do is react. The economic instability, fluctuating costs, and changing consumer behavior have created a level of stress that's really hard to describe. It's not just about money. It's about the emotional weight of trying to hold it all together. And even my part-time staff are feeling that crunch. They're asking for more hours, and it's to the point where I'm not paying myself so that I can get more money to them because I can hold on for a little bit, but it's been 6 months and it's getting really thin on my personal self as well. Traverse City's economy is deeply tied to its small businesses, right? We are not known for having a lot of huge mega companies. It's a lot of mom and pop shops. And we're more than just storefronts, right? We're neighbors, we're employers, we're part of the cultural fabric that draws people here. We're committed to adapting and staying resilient, and it's important to acknowledge how national policy decisions and ongoing economic volatility are hitting microbusinesses the hardest. So thank you for letting me share that experience. I tried to be succinct.
Thank you very much. Are there questions from the members? Yep, Senator McMorrow.
Thank you. Thank you so much for coming down and joining us today. I'm wondering if you could just talk, congratulations on 11 years, by the way. I'm wondering if you can talk through the decision and the process of starting your business and how long that took and how kind of reacting to the impacts now weigh on a small business. Because I think a lot of people, as the chair mentioned, think about our automakers, the large businesses who have been around now for some over a century, who have lawyers and large teams to manage this. But just talk about what went into starting your business and the impacts of the decisions day to day now.
Yeah, absolutely. My Secret Stash started, in my kitchen originally. I'm a soap maker. I'm a fourth generation soap maker. And so that started very small, doing art shows. And I literally would take the money, spend it, invest it, buy more product, and keep kind of going. And then 11 years ago, I opened the brick and mortar store. And I've been in retail for an appropriate number of years, and so I felt very confident because I've been running large businesses for large corporations, and I had a fantastic confidence in myself to be able to do this. And we launched, and when I first started, we literally had everybody coming in as a consignment situation. So all the artists that I knew from doing art shows and traveling, I picked my favorites, invited them in, and we all kind of floated the boat. And that we did that maybe for the first year and a half, and then slowly we would convert everybody into kind of more of a wholesaler where I would buy from them directly, which makes it easier for them as well. So that thought process was really easy. I've always been adept at flexing. So when something is popular, I'm watching those trends, we get on top of it, and I find the makers who are making those things. And when they kind of die down, we change up to next. And I've opened several businesses through that, and I also do quite a bit of small business mentoring partnership, trying to get people from, mom and pop literally on their kitchen table to how to move into maybe wholesaling, going through art shows, wholesaling to stores, and some brands becoming really national or slightly national, regional at least. And so this change has been an interesting flow. So Into Me opened a little over a year ago, April of last year. And it was skyrocketing. It was fantastic. And it was doing a lot of community service as well as, a retail business. And the challenge over this last 6 months has been remarkable. And I'm just spinning in a way that I haven't spun. The COVID era was easier for me to pivot than what's happening right now. I hope that answered. Yeah.
Yep. Senator Polanki.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think the one word that has been missing from this entire conversation is Trump. We can come out and say it. So the mercurial tariff by tweet, now we have grave foreign policy decisions being made by tweet, often as a result of the last person he talked to or someone he thinks who's smart, or who flatters him, who he likes, who he's mad at. And to see that it's affecting not only consumer spending, which is 70% of our GDP, but women like you who are trying to make ends meet. That we are being whiplashed about by the whims of President Trump is heartbreaking to me. So I just want to get that out there. Trump.
All right, thank you for that statement, Senator. I did have a question in regards to the finding of employees. I know right now I've been hearing from small businesses. We actually had two other colleagues of yours, in the sense of colleagues being small business owners who were hoping to be here, but because of crisis and moments of time, couldn't make it up here. But help me understand sort of the hiring that whether it's for you or for what you're hearing from your fellow small businesses, since you're part of the association. And then a second component, and maybe not for your store, but I know for many businesses in northern Michigan, oftentimes they rely on different visa classes to bring people in, especially in our hotel industry and restaurant industry, which I know you're not necessarily part of, but you're connected to all of that because of the fabric of your community. Are you seeing any of those impacts on, the immigration conversation impacting any of the employee hiring of other businesses sort of in your area?
Yes, all of that is yes. So I see all of it because, all of my dear friends are running the large and small hotels and bed and breakfasts and restaurants that are surrounding us. And we're all a chatty group. So the restaurant people who have been in business a long time have the whole J1 thing kind of on lockdown, and they know to start early, but it's a challenge. And I don't really have access to go find some J1 people just due to my size and the economy of a very small spot. What I will say is everybody's hiring and everybody's looking for that magical help, and it's hard because some of our larger businesses downtown are really great at knowing we're going to hire 100 people in because that's the season, and then they lock those people in, but as the economy isn't able to support that percent to sales for labor, then they start cutting those people's hours. So if you're maybe a college student home for the summer and you're expecting to work at this fantastic, beautiful, lovely, well-known business, and they're going to bring you on at maybe 30 hours a week, you're finding that you might start there, but right now they're only getting about 2 shifts a week. And so here's somebody who came home to commit to working for this, and they're not able to get the funds that college students need to get through, and that's incredibly frustrating, right? By the time that they are kind of led on to think, oh, it's going to get better and we're going to get those hours next week or the week after, now it's halfway through the summer and they're kind of lost their opportunity. And I certainly would love to be able to bring on 100 people, but we're just stretching thin with what we have. So it's a challenge.
Thank you. Senator Geis?
Thank you. Can you talk, a million years ago, I worked retail, so I'm thinking about the fact that 2 weeks it's going to be July. And granted, this doesn't affect necessarily your business, but that's when we're starting to stock, put on the shelves, where I'm not in that field anymore. Back to school things, right? And no one's really thinking about September and sending the kids back to school. But can you talk, for folks who don't necessarily understand the very cyclical nature of having to plan so far ahead, and also, because I found it very interesting that you'd mentioned that because of the tariffs and shipping, for example, your shipping and holding costs increased because they were passing those on to you. And that meant you had to make decisions about making those smaller batches, those smaller batch orders. Can you talk about what that means, not just for the supplies that you might be getting because you can get them at a better price for your bottom line, but what that means for your production and all of those things, and how, I would imagine too, you're trying to not pass some of these costs on to their customer, so that you don't lose those customers, so that they can hopefully make decisions where they are able, even though they're buying less, that they're not buying so much less that now you can't function. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, meaning speaking to that, the shipping cost and the holding costs, there are companies that used to figure in around 10 or 15% of my total sales, and they were national brands with a lot of product that was made overseas, but it was popular and really well-made product and fantastically received and things I loved. And I haven't spent a penny with a couple of those specific companies because if it's this much, now it's 50% more plus an extra 20% for shipping, and I just can't mark anything up that high. So those larger companies who do have offshore are getting zero of my business, even though I'd love to give them that business. And then the shipping costs, because everything is passed down to us, right? There's nobody overseas is paying that cost. The tariff comes up, they pass it to the original buyer, they're going to pass it to the middleman's going to pass it to me, and I'm going to pass it to the customer. There's no way around that. For shipping for our local small makers, let's say I've got a fantastic artist who makes these watercolor, kind of teach you how to watercolor books. So she has the picture on one side with all the instructions, and then you paint on the other side. And it doesn't really cost me that much more to ship 20 of those than it does to ship 50 of them, right? In a UPS type box, send it off. But I'm not buying 50 at a time. Normally I would buy 50 or 100 at a time. They're very popular and like fantastic. And I'm buying like 20 or 30, and then I almost have to order, as soon as I receive it, I feel like I have to order maybe the next 20 or 30 because I don't want to order the 100 and let it, what if they're not buying these things, then I'm going to be sitting on this for months and months. So I don't have the cash flow to manage that. So I have to keep it kind of low. So in that aspect, I'm paying double, triple, quadruple because I'm ordering 7 times. I'm ordering once a week instead of once every 6 weeks, if that makes sense. So for little bitty stores, that kind of flow affects us. A lot of my Michigan stores, I will literally just get in my car and drive a loop, Grand Rapids, Detroit, Flint, back up to Traverse City, and everybody meets me. And that's kind of one way that we've been getting around them, but it's still a tank of gas in a day. So there's no way of getting around this, but it's all these little small orders. The other end is that you think of like a jewelry maker. Somebody's making beautiful Petoskey stone or Leland blue wrapped in silver and magic. That's great, but where did they get that silver? Or the chains or the hooks, right? So they're not always hand making every hook. All that comes from overseas. There's nobody in America making these things. So while they're making the artwork part, kind of the supporting pieces all come from someplace else. And that increases those costs. So it's still increasing even though they're not buying a new Apple iBook or a new car, right? It's not something that big, but it's all that little stuff that adds up.
Yeah, real quick, we have one more speaker, so yep.
Real quick, so you made the point that a lot of these materials that are going into this beautiful work, whether it's a piece that's something that sparks joy or is a piece that's a necessity, those components are made elsewhere. And I think there's this fallacy that like all these tariffs are going to suddenly bring that production back here, or to here if it was never here or hasn't been here for decades or centuries. And I think that's something that we really need to hone in on, because even if we were to try to get those skill sets to build those components here, it's not happening in the next 6 months, year, or whatever.
It would take 5 years for somebody to, a company from China to say, great, I'm going to build this machinery here in the United States. The machinery is still going to come from China. They're going to bring it here and build it, and then trying to find people who will work in that factory at a point to keep jewelry fixtures small is still not going to happen. So we have to embrace the global economy portion of what's happening. But nobody can build any kind of machinery production situation in months. And I will say this, I grew up in Flint, so I am Flint bred, born and strong, and I lived through all of that, in the late 70s, early 80s when everything was disappearing, and now there is nothing left because everything exited, and they can't just go open up the factory again.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for being here. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Next speaker is Nick Nigro from Atlas Public Policy, who is on Zoom. Sir, if you can start speaking, I think you'll come on board here.
Thank you very much, Senator. And I appreciate the opportunity to join you all today. Sorry I couldn't be there in person. My name is Nick Nigro, and I am the founder of Atlas Public Policy. I just want to say that I really enjoyed hearing the previous speakers talk about the challenges of running a small business. I'm a small business owner myself. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Atlas and then share some of my perspective on what I like to call the clean economy. So for a decade, Atlas Public Policy has equipped businesses and policymakers with the tools and insights they need to make strategic, impactful decisions that are pragmatic and serve the public interest. At Atlas, we believe that data and technology can drive meaningful change and empower decision makers across various sectors. We are committed to enhancing the public good by working with government, industry, and the nonprofit organizations across the United States on critical areas like vehicle electrification, clean economy manufacturing and investments, building an industrial decarbonization strategy, climate policy, and water infrastructure. So all the data I'm going to talk to today is from a product we call the Clean Economy Tracker. It's a free tool we created in partnership with Utah State University, and it's available at cleaneconomytracker.org. So in the last several years, what we've seen, and as all you all know in Michigan, is a huge upswing in investments in manufacturing of clean technologies like electric vehicles, batteries, the processing and extraction of critical minerals, solar manufacturing, and wind manufacturing. So when I step back and think about where are we today, I would say the mission is not quite accomplished. If you look at Michigan, for example, we've seen nearly $30 billion in total clean manufacturing investments in the last several years, with $26 billion of that total being just in EVs and batteries. Both of these statistics are more than any other state. So you all are doing very well relative to your peers in the rest of the country. And these investments translate to tens of thousands of jobs, which of course make this a real nonpartisan issue. It's also a nonpartisan issue because for the country, it's a race for the future. This year, 1 in 4 vehicles sold worldwide will be electric. And believe it or not, more than half will be sold in China. Unfortunately, right now, we're stalling out at a very critical moment. Tens of thousands of jobs and the future, really, of the auto industry is at stake. Thankfully, there's still time, but the future is quite murky. Just to give you some statistics, because I'm an engineer and policy guy, we've got over 1,100 facilities that have had announced investments across the country, totaling $280+ billion and 350,000 jobs. Now, I say murky because of those 1,100 facilities, in the last couple months alone, we've seen 50 facilities with cancellations, totaling $15 billion and 20+ thousand jobs. So that's a really small fraction, right, of the total, even though it gets outsized attention in the media. It's only about 5% of the investments we've been tracking have canceled so far. But, you know, try to tell that small business owner or that factory worker that, you know, their job has been canceled. It's obviously very meaningful for wherever it's been happening throughout the country. When you look at where these investments are happening too, it's also happening in places that have either largely been ignored in the past or up and coming places for manufacturing. And so these investments are critically important to the future of those communities. Some companies have been able to pivot. You know, we've talked a little bit about that today. I'll give you another example. General Motors recently announced a slowdown in some of their work on electric vehicles and a shift in manufacturing, in part to reflect the tariffs that have been mentioned. But GM's a very, very big company. So while it's hard to do a lot of things at a big company, some of these activities like shifting production is actually feasible. And if policy environment and the policy signals changed either from here where I sit in Washington, D.C. or in Michigan or elsewhere, those policy signals could easily allow GM to reverse those decisions pretty quickly. So we step back and think also about what is the goal here? What are we trying to do? We're trying to build sustainable communities around jobs that pay well and spur other complementary economic investments, something that we call clustering. We've seen a lot of that in a lot of these factories. So when one factory can close or one investment is canceled, it can spur sort of a domino effect in other dependent companies in those areas. So in sum, if we really step and acknowledge the reality of the energy future that's really in front of us, you know, the electric vehicle, for example, that is the future of transportation. Solar, wind, batteries, and other forms of renewable energy is clearly the future of electricity generation. And if we acknowledge that future and we rely on American innovation, to meet those challenges, I'm quite confident that we're going to succeed. So I'll stop there, and I look forward to any questions you have.
Great. Are there any questions? All right, not seeing any. We appreciate your time today, and just want to make sure that we don't have any other speakers. And so seeing none, I want to thank the members that are here for being here and hearing this compelling testimony. And so seeing no other business, the Senate Committee on Oversight is now adjourned.